I think we're rolling. Welcome everybody to the Color Couch. Those of you who have chimed into the video version, you may have noticed something. It's the video version. You can see who I'm talking to, which is really, really cool. I've done this before where I ramble for about 10 minutes straight before saying who I'm talking to, who's sitting there going. So, welcome Patrick Inhofer to the Color Couch.
Thank you, Vincent. I'm very happy to be here.
How does it feel being on video? Is it snazzy?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's very personalizing. I got to tell you, I do a lot of videos myself, and I don't have to do, on camera when I do my videos. And I find that when I choose to do it, the audience responds a lot better. So I'm a big fan of video, even when, just listening on a podcast is just fine. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, up until this point, it's been, I've just, not that I've done that many, but I've just done audio podcasts. And it was after chatting to you months back, and you introduced me to this software, and I went, well, why not do video? I mean, I had to brush my hair, and you had to brush your hair. So, we had to look pretty.
I did. I washed my face.
Yeah.
As pretty as we can look.
Yeah, we work in dark rooms, so the lighting's always quite good. Now, for those of you who do not know, I mean, I've been following Patrick for many, many years, actually. Patrick, I'm going to introduce first of all as a teacher, because my gosh, you've been instructing people for such a long time, predominantly in the art of color grading. And Patrick runs a company called mixinglight.com, which if you haven't checked it out, please check it out. And this applies to people who are starting off in color, but it also applies to people who are have been doing it for years. I mean, I access it from time to time for all sorts of things. So it hits people all different levels. But I'm going to wind it right back. I want to hear first of all about how on earth did you get into this insane industry, and where did you start off?
Wow, we're going back to junior high. I mean, I started out as kind of a child actor, and yeah. Now, you don't know me from anything. I never made it to television or film or anything like that. But my mom, when I was like in 5th grade, my mom was really concerned because I never communicated very well, and I didn't have very many friends. And she thought that I was like this socially inept person. And so she got me involved in children's theater. And we spent 2 years in Minneapolis, and they have a big children's theater group there called the Children's Theater. So I would leave junior high at noon, take a bus into Minneapolis, a public bus, take that into Minneapolis, and then from, I forget what it was, like 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock at night, we were doing ballet and singing and circus skills. I juggle. That was the big takeaway that 50 years later, 40 years later is still with me, is the juggling. I can still juggle. And I went to Lee Strasberg School in Manhattan. I actually got accepted into Carnegie Mellon's drama program. And I remember the day that acceptance letter came in, and suddenly my mom, this thing that she had introduced me to that she was so excited thought would bring me out, was her single biggest fear is that her child was going to go to university to learn to act, right? It was the last thing she ever wanted to see happen. And so I remember that acceptance letter coming in. I remember running up to my room and opening it up. It says, "Hey, you've been accepted." And I looked at it, and for about 30 seconds, it was processing. And then I said, no way I'm going to make it in front of the camera. It's never going to happen. But I love the business. I love movies. I grew up on Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. I grew up on, skeletons fighting on ships and, all the stop motion stuff from the Sinbad movies. And I just knew that, I love the business. I want to be on the back end. I used to make on our VHS, I would make little stop motion movies of shoes in the house, going around the house and fighting and having love affairs and things like that, right? Crazy stuff, but just using my dad's, VHS, one frame at a time, and so that's how I got started in this crazy business. I ended up graduating from Hofstra University on Long Island in New York with a Bachelor of Science in Film and Television Production. I was a weirdo in that I did both the film program and the TV program. And there weren't a lot of us who did that. Like the film kids were, and you were cutting film. You were on 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter. We had a Steenbeck. But then downstairs was the television program with 3 huge studios with lighting grids that came down from the ceiling, and there was a student television news channel. So we recorded our own shows, and they aired on the closed circuit cable television network. And this is 1986, right? So it was a fantastic program. I consider it at the time it was more of a technical school, a trade school for me, because when I got out and graduated, I could run VTRs. I knew how to read scopes. I had worked with digital DVEs, to fly things around on an ADO and things like that. For those of us old enough to remember those types of devices. And then that just got me to here. I've been in the business ever since. So I got my first job in 1989, and I've been doing this ever since. 10 years full time as an editor, and then about 10 years kind of editor colorist, with most of that time just spending transitioning into color, and then 10 years full-time as a colorist. So but even as an editor, I was always a finishing guy.
Right.
So I always, everything went straight to air. So, the producer would walk in and they'd give you a box of tapes, and they'd have a notebook filled with time code numbers. And so we're doing the narrative, we're putting the edit together, but I also have to take care of audio levels. I also have to make sure everything looks good. So I'd be finished that day, and the next day I've got spots on the air, I've got promos on the air, NBA inside stuff Saturday morning. We'd be there till 3 o'clock in the morning on Friday night waiting for the West Coast NBA shows to finish up. And then I wake up, and I was an assistant on that one, and I wake up the next morning and it's airing as I'm eating breakfast. And so creating good-looking pictures was always part of my shtick when I was an editor. It's like I know how to do that. I know how to go to air. And so when these digital tools came out for color grading, that's what the moment like Final Cut Pro 3 with the 3-way color corrector, I was hooked and I never looked back.
Yeah, I'm fixated on this image of you sitting there with that acceptance letter. I mean, what age were you then? How old were you when you were making that decision?
17, 18, 17, 18, senior year in high school. Yeah.
That's it.
And I never regretted it, although I do miss theater. I do. But what I miss, and I imagine you get this in film and television on set, is the camaraderie of the group. You're all working together for a month or 2 or 3 months, and you build this rapport and these connections and rivalries, and then sometimes it goes south and it gets very vicious, and high school, and so it gets very cliquey. But I do miss that. Like even as an editor, I would get that. Usually with my producer, like we're working for weeks and weeks on end together. As a colorist, that all kind of goes out the window. The job comes in. You're lucky if they've consulted you in pre-production.
It's true.
Most of us, although there are exceptions in our craft where the colorist goes out on set, but most of us aren't going out on set. I never do, and so I don't get that kind of long-term relationship. And so people are in and then they're out. Now I build relationships with producers and directors, and then they become regular clients. But even then, it's a couple of weeks at a time. Maybe if it's episodic, a couple months. But I don't get quite that large group, tight-knit experience that I used to get in theater. And I don't know, maybe if I ever retire, I'll do like community theater here in Orlando or someplace. Who knows?
Are you conscious of any of those skills? Those skills as an actor. Did any of those skills come across into this world, or?
I got to think it does. I mean, certainly my comfortableness being in front of a group of people helps. Being an editor and a colorist, I often think sometimes you're part therapist, and
Yes.
that there's some acting in there. Like, I'm not acting, right? Like, I care about my clients, but there are times when I'm like trying to, I'm sitting there and I'm working and I'm focusing on my image, and my client's like talking about something that's going on with, someone on set or, whatever, their client. And you have to be able to kind of manage that. And then as an instructor, it definitely helps. There's no doubt about it. With my training and getting in front of an audience, I know I used to do lots of live training. I would do events like NAB NAB 2022 is happening right now. And so I would do those events where we'd have a room of 200 people and I'm teaching something about DaVinci Resolve or color grading and so it definitely helps on that. It helps being able to command a room, to have a voice that reaches out. And I remember it was, I forget exactly who was in the car. We were in Beijing and we were training in Beijing. And it was me, Robbie Carmen, and someone else. And we were on a taxi with a tour guide who was taking us to the Great Wall of China. And she turns around, and because all three of us were all trainers, and we all have like these loud voices, we able to command a room. And she turns around, she goes, "I feel like I'm listening to the BBC." And we just kind of cracked up. She's like, "Your voices you sound like you're like television, radio people." And I don't know about that, but yeah, certainly I think the ability to use your voice in order to help maintain interest. I've been told that things, one of the reasons why it's kind of easier to watch my videos is, I'm not talking in this kind of monotone voice.
Absolutely.
I accentuate up and down. I put inflection in. And I think that is definitely related to that early childhood training.
Yeah, I would say that you're everything I've watched that you've done, you're very engaging. And when I've seen you do the occasional video with somebody else, or like with Robbie or something else, you're listening. Your listening is really, really good as well. So it's I did not know that about you, about that background. That's amazing.
Yeah. I don't go around advertising that. And by the way, a good actor is a good listener.
Yes.
It's not just you're running off your lines. You're listening to your energy is reflected back from the person you're talking to. And if you don't listen, you need to. That's how you get that rapport on stage. Even though everyone knows the lines, the ability to express those lines in a way that connects with the audience requires as if you're responding to the first time, and you can't respond to the first as if it's the first time you heard these lines if you're not actively listening. And so I think that's where a lot of that comes. I like to think that's what I'm doing is I'm actually listening in conversations like this.
So ultimately you've got this incredible foundation of all of this the skill set, and then something pulled you more towards color grading and color correction. Was there a single thing, or was it a combination of things that did that?
I've thought about this a lot, like why color grading, and I think one of the reasons I teach it is I'm very self-aware of, like as I started color grading, I was like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I pulling this slider? Why am I moving this wheel in the direction that I'm moving it in? I think a lot of it has to do with the hand-eye thing. Like, color grading, if you get off the mouse and onto a control surface, it's this biomechanical experience. I am physically interacting and I'm seeing feedback through my eyes. And it's this very physical connection to what I'm looking at. And I think that's what I find appealing. The thing I loved about online editing back in the linear days was running the switchers and running, the Chiron and, the kaleidoscope and the K-scope and all, and I'd have all of these different pieces of equipment, and it was very physical as well. And so that's what I think a lot of my joy out of color grading comes from, is it's an entire full body experience. It's not just cerebral. I think of something, I physically do it, and then I get that visual feedback. It's immediate, and when it works well, it's gratifying, and when it doesn't, it's frustrating as hell. But, I think that's what it is. It's like this. It's a total body experience for me. And I just, they talk about getting into a zone, and I mean hours, days can drop away on a big job. It's like I sit down and then I sit down at 9 o'clock in the morning and I look at my watch and it's dinner time, and I'm like, I didn't even stop for lunch, and I have no idea where the hours went. I was just in this zone, and I love being in that zone. I can just drop into it like that.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing I love about color grading. It allows me to get into that space.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that, and especially that thing about the zone. I mean, I've been grading a while now, and it still gets me so happy. I just every job, so many things have changed as far as what we use and how we do it, but I still get in that place, and you get lost in it, and it's a lovely lost. It's not a scary lost. And then you've been doing this a long time now, and I'm avoiding the teaching for a moment because I really want to focus on that and mixing light, but
Yeah, sure.
during that that incredibly long career, what are there kind of some fundamental changes that you've seen in like what we use to with our craft?
Oh yeah, I mean, I survived the transition from online physical tape, linear editing with physical tape media, where a room would cost $1 million to set up a finishing suite, with 10-bit tape recorders, DCT machines and D2 and D1 and that all the way now. And then, but I was using Avid in 1992 as well. So, I mean, it was the recording codec in Avid when I started was AVR3. And it was the compression was so blocky that when we would go back and do the finishing off a tape, we'd have to select alternate takes because we suddenly realized that these actors' eye lines were all off, like they're looking in the wrong place. And you couldn't tell on AVR3 because you couldn't see their pupils. The codec was so blocky. And but I got off of that pretty quick. So another editor came in, and I was a junior at that point, and he took over that part of the business. So I was an online guy for 10 years. So I survived that transition. And then when the Declan card, the initial Declan card first came out, that's when I realized everything was going to change. I knew that where we are today, 20 years later, that this is where we were going to end up, where you could use an off-the-shelf, Mac or laptop to do the kind of work we're doing, and you can. I mean, unless you're at the very highest end of our business and you're working 8K, you need stereoscopic real time, right? But for the fundamentals of what we're doing, I mean, you put it, if you can drop it into a 1080p timeline, you can work on just about any off-the-shelf consumer product, in terms of computers. So I saw that 20 years ago. I'm like, this is where I'm going. I went freelance, and then I eventually opened up my own studio. So that was the initial big transition I saw, from linear to nonlinear, and then from nonlinear to being able to take that $1 million room and shrink it down into a $5,000 computer with, easily affordable software.
And when you say you opened your own studio, was that doing online and finishing and color, or was it transitioning more into color?
It was I called it Fini.tv. And so the concept is I was the last stop, right? So you would come to me after picture lock, and then I'd do all your graphics and make your show look good, and we do all your final exports. So I had digibeta machines, and I'd create your masters, and away you would go. So yeah, that's exactly what I did. And then I think the other major transition I've seen now is color management has completely blossomed, and that's largely on the color grading side, and just everything with the raw captures. And now we've got the color management on the finishing side. Now we have the complete package where you just have this kind of from camera to finishing workflow, this pipeline where you can create really amazing images again with very affordable computer systems and camera systems. And so I think that's the next big transition, which on top of that, you layer on top of that high dynamic range. So now we're actually changing the canvas that all of us, if you think of it as like a painter, it's like we're going from watercolor to oils, right? It's like all of a sudden we've got a much bigger canvas that we can work with. So that's been another big change I've seen. And then also I would mix in with that the Dolby Vision, which I love it because the concept is, even in the mid 90s at home, I was always wanted to, I like owned a Laserdisc player because I
Awesome.
wanted to see the image the way the filmmaker, right? I wanted to see the image the way the filmmaker created the image. And with Dolby Vision, that's yet another step closer, right? Where the whole point of Dolby Vision is to deliver this full dynamic range mastering deliverable, and then you get as close as you can to viewing that on whatever device you're viewing on, and that'll be different depending on the device, but it'll be optimized for that device, right? And so for me, that's also another huge leap forward, and I've been a huge fan of Dolby Vision since I first learned about it.
And then there was a spark there that kind of obviously pushed you more just into that color grading spectrum, right? And just into that little road. So again, was there a moment that happened, or was it just a logical progression for you?
I think Apple Color, when Apple Color, and it was Final Touch before that, and I had seen Final Touch at NAB. I had heard about it on the various message boards, but when Apple bought Final Touch, they bundled it into Final Cut Studio, and they pushed it out and included it as part of Final Cut Studio. That's when I was like, I can do this full time now, because what Apple did is it set the expectation in the marketplace that color correction isn't a plugin that you treat like some other video effect. Color correction is a standalone app with a standalone set of creatives who are colorists. And so Apple was the biggest marketing thing I ever saw for the kind of work that I wanted to do, move into color grading. I'm like, I don't have to explain color grading. Apple is doing it for me. They've set the standard that colorists are an actual skill and an actual trade. And I dove into color, and that was it. I was off and running and transitioning. I spent about 3 years transitioning out of any kind of editing, and just, my goal was to be a full-time colorist all the time.
So you'd pushed into color grading, and that was lighting some fires. But then somewhere along there, you decided to start actually teaching or instructing or talking more about color in general. How did that come about?
That came about actually from my Final Cut days. So I'd go to the New York Final Cut Pro user group in Manhattan, and I went to a couple of these, and I met the guy who was leading it at the time. His name was Michael Vitti. He passed away, God rest his soul. His great friend, really good guy. And he was the president of the New York Final Cut Pro user group. And he asked me, he said, teach, like, I know you do good work. You're a professional working with Final Cut. Come on in, talk about something. I'm like, well, how about I teach the 3-way color corrector? Because no one knows how to use it. He's like, yeah, okay. And that's how I got, and that was like the first thing I ever did. And at that meeting, that's where I just started. They'd asked me to come back. I'd gotten a lot of questions, and that's how I got into that. Eventually, I became the treasurer of that user group. And then Michael Vitti passed away at NAB, and then I took over as president for a year or two. And then finally, I'd launched my online training, and I'd gotten to the point where I couldn't do both. I couldn't do both the user group and my online training and running my regular business. And so I eventually handed off management of that user group And yeah, and that's how I got into the whole training side of things.
And then it just kept growing, didn't it? I mean, talk about evolution. And now you've got mixinglight.com, and that itself has got a story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's been an evolution. I mean, if you were to drop into Mixing Light today, you might think that it just kind of formed that way fully as a complete thought. But it's been running for 9 years. It's evolved for 9 years. And then even before that, I'd been teaching for 5 years prior to that, including my own personal taoofcolor.com training that I'd done. And, I started teaching, I think my first online training course was maybe Final Cut 6, definitely Final Cut 7. It included Apple Color. And I never stopped. The way I got to Mixing Light is Robbie Carmen and Dan Moran came to me and said, we want to do something in this space. You've got Tao of Color going on. We're thinking of maybe finding someone to partner with and building something new. And my answer was, look, I do a lot of standalone training, and Tao of Color was always these standalone training packages. And, I would record like 20 hours of training, and you could submit your projects to me based on the common, I'd deliver you a project and you could deliver me back your color grades and I'd give you critiques. But the problem that I had personally with standalone training is you have to keep producing it all the time. And so I'd have to keep creating all of these standalone training packages year after year. And I've just found that exhausting. And I was like, I'd love to do a membership site. The problem with the membership site is it's a hungry beast. You have to keep delivering content day after day, week after week, month after month. And because people are, you're hitting them up every month, every quarter, every year, you have to keep delivering content. And I can't do that alone. I mean, it's too much for one person to do. And, but I said with 3 of us, we could make that happen. And I think there's a big need for continuing education. Training packages are fine, but they always tend to be at like this base level. You're always onboarding people, and you can only get to a certain level of complexity and detail before just the number of people who are willing to watch it or who are capable of using that information, it starts falling off and falling off. So when you get to 3, if you think of like a college course, 101 is your biggest audience, and then 201, the audience shrinks, and then 301, the audience shrinks, and then you get to your master's and PhD, and then you're down to like 4 people. And I'm like, I'd love to be able to produce 101, PhD, master's level, 301, 201, and just change it up. And the 101 people will benefit from hearing the PhD guys or gals talking, right? And the PhD level people, you know what? It's actually useful every now and then to get back to that 101 level and remember the things you had forgotten. And I felt like a service that could mix all of that together from a wide variety of voices would add value. And that's what Mixing Light is. And that's what we built that service to become. And so it moved beyond the 3 co-founders. I think we have about 15 contributors in total, of which right now I'd say who are active and that published in the past year is probably 9 or 10 have published in the past year. And some of them publish, twice a month, once a month, regular contributors. And so that's been my big focus for the last 9 years. The Tao of Color standalone training went away. In the process, I've also been producing training for LinkedIn, which is that 101 level onboarding thing, right? That quick 3-hour course. And it's usually DaVinci Resolve is pretty much what I focus on nowadays. It's just everywhere and easy to get. And so it's the natural thing to focus on. I am trying to get Baselight. I'd love to get colorists on Mystica and some of these other platforms as well. Even if most of us never touch them, we can learn from their thought process. How do these other apps think differently? Because it'll give you new ideas and new approaches into whatever app you're using on your regular job.
Well,
And
sorry to cut you off, Patrick, but you hit on something about mixing light that I adore, and yes, it focuses a lot on some Resolve things and teach you Resolve techniques. But one of the things I love about it, and why I always kind of wave the flag for it, is because it also talks about color grading or color correction, and it doesn't matter what system you use. It talks about what inspires you and what you get excited about. It does go. You've started doing a baselight course. You've started with Luke and things like that.
Yep.
And I think that's great. And picking up on something you said earlier, and this is why I have come back to it over the years. I won't use a certain facet of grading for a long, long time, and all of a sudden, I'm thrown into a job where I have to, and I go, and that's something that I can access. And look, full transparency. I mean, Laupost, they host this show, but there's room for all of it, and that's the thing I love about it. And there's
I think so too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and they've all got different strengths and weaknesses anyway. But I think it's really interesting now the way you use that word evolution, and the way that mixing light has evolved is so awesome. The way it's grown, and that you do have all these different voices now, and it feels alive. It doesn't feel like this standalone course, and it just feels like it's just grown so much. It's really, really good. And so hat off to you, man. I think it's amazing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And in fact, with the start of the pandemic, we started implementing things in order to build more community features, have our members interacting more and more with each other. So it started off as a Slack channel, like a private Slack channel. That's now migrated into straight up forums, where now we've got kind of like Lift Gamma Gain, but private, but also those forums plug directly into our individual insights. So if you're not familiar with Mixing Light, what happens is most of our tutorials, we call them insights, are either articles, podcasts, or videos, and most of these things we try to keep relatively short. By a short video, I mean under 20 minutes. And over 6 or 7 minutes, right? So like not really 3-minute videos, like 6 or 7 minute. And the concept being is take a single thought and explore the thought, right? I'm not trying to teach you the entire app. I'm trying to teach you something very specific. But we don't just limit it to apps either. We also talk about business, and we're doing a conference call tomorrow, a members only live conference call that's all about business, and it's about client relations and setting rates and all of that. And I'm going to have four contributors on there, and then members will be able to ask questions. And then when that gets posted, it'll have a comment section, but the comments now are also part of the forum. So if you watch an insight now, and this is new for us. It used to be if you watched an insight that was published 5 years ago and still relevant today. I mean, 80% of that content is still relevant, 8 years later. What would happen is you'd leave a comment on that, and the only people who would ever see it would be the admins of the website and the author who wrote that insight, 4 years ago. Now, because it's part of the forum, your new comments show up as a new thread on the forum. So even old content with new comments can become fresh again. And so it's all about, and then not just the author will be able to respond, but all the other members suddenly get to read it now. They see that comment. All the other members can come in and comment. And so I'm spending the rest of this year, we're building up that community feature. We just rolled out forums. It's version like 0.8 right now. Taking a month off from it, getting feedback from our members, and then we're going to start development on it again, building more community features, allowing members to kind of connect with each other on a regional basis is what I hope will come of it. We'll see. I'm glad you feel like it's kind of vibrant and alive, because the way I explain it, and when I talk to our contributors and they say, well, what should I write about? I said, what interests you today? Like literally, what problem did you solve yesterday? You solved a problem over the past week, and you were excited to solve that problem. And I guarantee you that excitement will come through on these videos or in your article. And you will get our members excited to have an answer to this problem that they may have not even realized they had. And there'll always be a small percentage of members who are also going through it right now, who will be very, very excited that they have an answer for that problem. And so I think by not requiring contributors to always think about the value add, and I just say, if you're excited about it, it's worth talking about. And it's worth content putting onto Mixing Light. And that's kind of my driving force for contributors as to what makes good content on the website or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, and you touched on this with that when you had Tower of Color. One of the things that just the way color grading has developed over the last decade or even more is, the junior colorist or the apprenticeship has kind of got lost in the speed of things happening. And you mentioned it with Tower Color, like actually giving feedback and interacting. And what you're talking about now with this idea where other members can contribute, you get that feedback, you get that, and that's where you grow, I think. Because you're getting somebody else going, yeah, but why did you do it that way? Why don't you try this? Why don't you, and you get that. It's really rich. I think it's a lovely idea.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about that. I'll tell you the truth. So when I did that thing where I'd hand you a project, it was very important to me that we were both working off the same notes. In other words, I would have a project that you were color grading, not you walk in with any random project and then I give you feedback. That doesn't work because I have no idea what your client notes are. I don't know what the director told you. It's not about my preference. It's about your client's preference. So on the projects back in the Tower Color days, the projects I'd hand you, I would have an interview. You would get an interview with the actual director of that project. And you would hear our discussion, and then we marched forward from those notes so that I always knew that the notes I was giving you back were based off the director or the producer's desires, not out of some sense that I've got these awesome, amazing eyes and I just happen to know what looks good and doesn't. Because all of our clients are all different and they all have different opinions, right? And so I'm always, on Mixing Light right now, there is not a way, I don't really have a forum set up for critiques, right? Where you're working on a spot or you're working on a short film and you post it up and then people can give you feedback. Because I think it's unfair to the client because they haven't been able to, they're not in there telling you what their direction is. I have to rely on the person submitting, and I can't just out of nowhere say it's good or bad. It's good or bad in relation to what? In the context of what? And so Colorist Flight School will come back to Mixing Light, the concept of handing you a project, giving you a direction, and then ensuring that you follow a very particular workflow so that you're not attacking the look before you've done your shot matching or your basic balancing. I think that's important to teach that structure as well. And so that's part of that Colorist Flight School concept is teaching a very structured workflow as well and ensuring you're following that workflow, not getting ahead of yourself and then creating more work on the back end.
You made all these little sparks go off in different parts of my brain at exactly the same time. Because I thought about, this exercise we had, like 20 years ago in film school where we all got given the same, I think it was footage from Rawhide or Gunsmoke or something like that, but we all got given the same.
That's a classic.
We all got given the same footage. We all got given, 8 hours to cut a scene, and although we didn't get direction about what we needed to get out of that, it was great because we all had the same material to work with, and there's something really great about that. And it's and the other spark that went off on the other side of my brain was Colorist Awards for color grading, and this is I think they're great, but this is my big issue or challenge with them is it depends on what the parameters were when you were grading. How much time did you have? What was the direction? Was it going off in a different direction to what you wanted to do? And there's so many variables, and it's an interesting conversation. I like it.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I don't think there'll ever be a Mixing Light Colorist Award. I love that Baselight is doing their awards. Like, there needed to be something out there. And I love how Baselight did it. and I think there's a place for it. But I do think you're right. I think it's more reflective of the trends of the moment than it is about the skill or the ability or the obstacles that were overcome. And without having any reference as to, what did the raw footage look like?
Yes.
Normalized even, just like if I just apply a normalized LUT to this thing and looked at it and see what you had to overcome. Because frankly, half the DPs in the world never want you to see that anyway, right? So even if you wanted to have an awards that allowed that to happen, there'd be tons of resistance from our clients in ever presenting their finished product in anything that approaches kind of the raw state of it.
I'm intending to get Filmlight to do an episode of this podcast with Filmlight to talk about the awards. When they happened last year, they kind of said, "Oh, would you be interested in doing that?" I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." And I said at the time, I suggested, and I think I even used the same Gunsmoke idea. I said, "What about having a category, where you give people who want to enter that award the same footage?" And they went, all right. So who knows? We'll see. Watch this space. We'll see.
I did participate in one of those as a judge a couple of years ago. This was in Beijing, and our host who flew us out there, they had a contest. And they had a bunch of these regional contests throughout China, and then the winners of the regional contest came to Beijing, and there were, 8 or 10 or 12 colorists. And they all sat down on the exact same footage. They had never seen it before, and they were just told, go. And you have 1 hour. And at the end of the hour, hands off, walk away, and then the judges walk around from machine to machine, and, you have some variety of criteria, and you score them up, and a winner is declared. I thought that was kind of fun.
I was interesting.
Right? I was a little skeptical, but it was good. It was interesting. And as much fun as it was, the evaluation was it was a little annoying because I never felt like I really understood what exactly I was evaluating against. But watching them work and the process that each colorist went through was as interesting as the final result and the final score and the final tally.
But there was a direction that was given initially to each person, or not?
No, there was no direction. So you were handed, I think it was either maybe a minute and a half piece, and I think we did it twice, 2 years in a row. The first year was more like a promo, and the second year was more of a documentary, like a mini documentary. Or documentary short. And so, each year was slightly different. You had one had to be a little more slick than the other. The other was a little longer. So time management was really important that second year because you had more shots you had to get through and you really had to manage that 1 hour of time. And whereas the other one was, it was more like 7 or 8 shots that you really had to grade up and make, like a slick ad, right? And there's something about that I kind of like, and that would be interesting to do at like an NAB or something like that, and have colorists like working colorists come out and do that.
I've got it for you. This is it. So it's a 3-round color off, right? Round one is color correction. So you basically got some shots, and you've got to get the shots match. That's round one, and then through that, say you get four finalists, and then after that, you give them a direction, all right, and then say, okay, it's got to be moody or it's got to feel cold or whatever, and say from that round you get 2 left, and then the final round is a 12-minute session, and they've got to go for it, and they get directions. But then during it, the directions change. They go, nah, you know what? I don't like that.
I changed my mind.
I don't like that. Can it be a bit more green? Because that's closer to a real session. People go, that's not quite what I want. I want it to be greener. I want it to be, and then, and you have to make them, turn left and turn right and turn, and that's how you get your winner. Brilliant, genius.
And that's the skill of color grading, right? I mean, that is literally what the real skill is. I mean, you got to have the fundamentals and the shot matching and understand balancing and how to read scopes and all that. But really, it's client management. It's having that discussion and maybe even talking them out of an idea or showing them an idea as quickly as they can, just so you can get off that idea. And, 2 times out of 10, you'll be surprised to say, oh, wow, that really worked. And then you just dig deeper into that idea, right? So that's interesting. That would be fun. I don't know. Do you think colorists would sign up for that? Do you think they would I
don't know. I just
put themselves out.
I just come up with the ideas, Patrick. I'm not going to implement it. I wanted to ask you, NAB is kind of, we're right in the middle of NAB, or it's finished, or I don't know even where it's at. But anything from that you've seen that you've got excited about?
I can't say no, not really. Only because I haven't had a chance to really dig into NAB yet. I do know, Blackmagic released Resolve 18 just a week ago today, and there's some interesting stuff going on there. I had been waiting for them to do some sort of remote collaborative workflow, and I think probably the most exciting thing off the marketing headline, right, is their cloud-based database that then allows you to enable their collaborative workflow in real time to people across the world. One can be on the edit page, the other could be on the color page, working on the same project, off the same database, simultaneously in a true collaborative setup that previously required you to be doing it on a local area network. And that, I think, is huge. We'll see how people adopt it, but I've always been a big fan of Resolve's collaborative workflow. We've been hearing and seeing companies try to crack the studio nut, the studio in a software package where you've got editing and audio and coloring and graphics, right, all in one package. And companies have been going at this for years, and then the collaborative thing as well, and been failing left and right. And I think DaVinci Resolve is really the first mature product that answers that call. And now to be able to do that off the same database, you're on the edit page, I'm on the color page, I'm in Orlando, you're in New Zealand or wherever, that's brilliant. I mean, that's amazing. And I was a little critical of them last year that we hadn't seen something like this. We were a year into the pandemic at that point, and I couldn't understand why we didn't have something along those lines. I didn't know what it would be. But now that I see it, I'm like, no, this was probably worth the wait. And, assuming it works the way it should, the way the marketing looks like it works, some early tests from some mix and light contributors seem to indicate that it is working. That, I think, is very exciting. But we'll see. I mean, for me, the most exciting stuff that comes out of NAB is the stuff that the marketing teams don't find interesting. Right, so they market, and what they put in the trade papers or on their website, I'm like, those top 5 features you talk about, no, that wasn't the most interesting thing in this release. I'll show you what the most interesting thing was, and it's usually this little thing in some niche someplace that saves me time every day. That's what I'm looking for, a bunch of these little features that shave a little bit of time off my day in and day out. That's the stuff that gets me really excited. So.
Yeah. Now, you've taken time out. People don't know you've taken time out twice for me, because the first time I had technical problems, but you've taken time out again to have a chat to me, which I'm so grateful for. And I'm not just blowing smoke. I'm a huge fan of what you've done, and you've helped me. You've helped me out over the years, just quietly with a couple.
Thank you, Vincent.
And somewhere, I don't know how the space-time continuum works, but somehow you also managed to put out a newsletter as well.
My weekly newsletter.
If people want to follow that newsletter, how do they access that?
Currently, that's taoofcolor.com, TAO of color.com. And then you just, right off that homepage, is the very top is sign up for the newsletter. And that goes out every Sunday morning with your morning coffee, is how I pitch it. And it's a curated list of the most interesting things that I find interesting, usually with some bit of commentary. Sometimes I add some commentary. Sometimes it's just an excerpt of the article, so you have a sense of the article. And the concept isn't you need to read all 20 or 25 of these things. If you find 2 or 3 items that you find interesting, that's my goal, is for each reader to find 1 or 2 things to click on that's relevant to them in their day and in their work. That's my goal there. And so that's taoofcolor.com. We're making, it's that concept is about, it's about to get updated. I can't talk fully about it yet. We're still in kind of the redesign of it. But yeah, I plan on making that and probably integrating that into Mixing Light at some point.
Okay.
So one of the nice things since I took over Mixing Light and I bought out Robbie and Dan is I can now take all of these ideas from my Tao of Color days and my Mixing Light days, and now it's way easier for me to turn this all into one big gestalt. You know, I can take all of these different things I've done over the years and finally combine them into this single thing that, like I said, you could come at us at the PhD level, or you can come at us as the freshman, you know, or even the high school senior, right? And you can come in at either level, and that's what I'm going for.
I love that analogy. Actually, it's really clear and you can fire in at different places. Patrick, I'm super grateful. Thank you very, very much for taking time out. And just to reiterate, anyone who wants to check out mixinglight.com, look, please do. It's well worth the effort. Patrick, take care, and thank you so very much.
Vincent, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to come in here, talk with your audience. I'm a subscriber to your podcast, so when you reached out to me, I was like, yay! So happy to do it, and happy to be here, and thank you very much.
Thanks,
I appreciate
mate.
it.
Thanks everyone for having another listen and watching for the first time as well for the video version of the podcast. Yeah, everyone take care of each other. See ya.